predominantly, if anything, I'm a bacteriologist. I spent over 30 years in a clinical setting in one of the 5 major hub centres in New South Wales, in a delightful city called Newcastle, where I was in charge of the Department of Microbiology and Infectious Disease. I also have a conjoint appointment at the University of Newcastle. And this delightful city actually attracted me, so everybody said, if you want to be serious about medical sciences, you have to come down to Melbourne. So here I am. And currently I have a conjoint appointment with the University of Melbourne and also in Victoria University. Now, in the past years, I was always shy away from giving public speaking because I'm such a very small status. I don't want to upset anybody talking about chronic fatigue. So last 2 weeks ago, I gathered enough courage and actually spoke to a whole group of psychiatrists not far from here, in Delmont Hospital, psychiatric hospital. And they didn't put me out. So I assume that things have changed. Now, if I'm to say to you that for human being to have energy to do things, it depends very heavily on the bacteria that we all carry. Would anybody disagree with me here? Or do you realize that we are very, very much dependent on the bacteria that we all carry? Do we know that?
Yeah.
Oh, go on. You don't. If I also say to you that comparatively, the gut microorganism in patients with persistent fatigue is very different to other chronic diseases, the gut organism and the chronic diseases. In fact, if you actually compare the microbiology of patients with chronic fatigue syndrome and compared to so-called healthy control, that's a significant difference. That's a significant difference. However, if you look at the genetic component, I'm talking about DNA, you're all aware of the DNA and all that. But if you look at the DNA of the gut microorganism, of the gut ecology of the chronic fatigue syndrome, and compared to other chronic diseases, that's very similar. And in fact, actually, you compare that to a healthy control, they're also very similar. So there's a dichotomy here. Why is it that I'm saying for 1 minute that the microorganism in the large bowel is very different in healthy control of a patient with persistent fatigue. But when you look at the genetic component of it, they're very similar. They're very, very similar. So what are these organisms we are talking about? Now, the organism I'll be referring to this afternoon is generally known as the commensal organism. Commensal organism, as the word suggests, it came from a Latin word, commensalis, and that means that we're all at table having a meal and with actually no detrimental ideas or intent of any obvious benefit from the other person. Now this is very different to symbiosis. The symbiosis is that we need each other. For example, husband and wife, the husband needs the wife and the wife needs the husband. Don't laugh, this is a fact. And we're actually codependent on each other. Now, as such, because we need each other, now you hear on the television and worse in some academia regards the commensal organism, the organism that you carry, I carry, there's such a thing as bad or non-beneficial. No such thing. Every organism that you carry are beneficial. they are beneficial. There's no such thing as bad organism that we carry. If it is bad, our body, the host would not allow it to be there. And if it is bad, that particular person will be all gone and buried long time ago. We are where we are because of the microorganism in the gut allow us to be there, to be here, talking to you, for example. So the beneficial effect of the so-called the microbiota, and I'll talk about the difference between microbiome and the microbiota, is particularly related to the relative absence or abundance of what they produce. Forget about the name of the organism. Only bacteriologists like to show themselves they're very important and spout about all different names, right? But importantly, it is what they produced that is so important to us. If they don't produce enough, we have disease. If they produce too much of it, we will have disease. Right? So importantly, it's the metabolites. It's the metabolites that give us life and importantly cause sickness to us. So for the rest of the afternoon, I want you to think about what they produce. Simple things like, for example, vitamins. It is the vitamins that also keep us alive. They produce the vitamins. The numerous cofactors, and I'll be talking about one of the cofactors today, which is so important in energy metabolism. And without that, we will have fatigue. And this is precisely why chronic fatigue, the fatigue in here is not psychiatric, it's organic. And I'll tell you more about this. Now, frequently asked question is this one. When we're born, all our microorganisms are acquired predominantly from the mother, and every time when the bub is being handled by another person, be it uncle and aunties, and every time we googa, we kiss it, we pass microorganism to the child. Right? The doctors, pediatrician, nursing staff, when they come and have a look at and check the temperature and all that, and when they talk, they spout saliva, and that saliva contains a lot of microorganisms that we have, and then directly onto the child. Now, it's well known that the child that born through via the birth canal is definitely much higher chance of having a disease-free adult than by cesarean section. We all know that. And in fact, that in the neonate, if the gut microorganism are different to that of a normal birth, canal birth, and if that's not corrected, that child is particularly prone to also what we call atopic diseases, asthma, eczema, and all the other type of allergic reactions. So the child, when they grow up, that organism, when they get colonized in the gut, it becomes what we term as endogenous. That means it will be part of us for the rest of our life, as opposed to exogenous, which is this sort of food poisoning organism. The exogenous organisms, like for example Salmonella, Shigella, which we Asians are particularly prone to it because our eating habits is very different to yours because we eat everything that moves. So we'll eat a lot of things. We try everything, and we do have a significant amount of what we call, particularly with this one, Campylobacter. Now, exogenous organisms haven't got a right to colonize in the gut. They cannot colonize in the gut. Right? So what they do is that they get into the lumen of the bowel, they got plenty of food, they multiply, and within 7 days they'll be all gone. Why are they gone? Where are they gone to? Because the diarrhea will flush them all out. When you have food poisoning, do not resist that bowel motion. Let it run. Let it go as quickly as possible and as frequent as possible. Hence, when you have food poisoning, absolutely no reason why you need to be on antibiotics. Absolutely no reason. Food poisoning is very, very self-limited. But why is it that when patients do have food poisoning, although I've been saying that in 7 days all the microorganisms in the large bowel be all flushed out, why is it that all the patients still feel very unwell? Anybody?
Flushed out with good bacteria as well, perhaps?
Now, I've been telling you, no such thing as good and bad bacteria. They're all good. All right? We feel bad because of the metabolites. All right? The so-called eukaryotic toxin is produced by those food poisoning organisms. It's still within the system. It's still within the system. And it takes a few more days before those metabolites will be actually being got rid of. Right? So tonight, this afternoon, I'll be talking about what they produce. And for the benefit of trying to understand the concept, I'll identify simple organism, which I hope that you have heard before, right? and concentrate on that. Now, I've been saying that that the gut microorganism is responsible for producing energy. Now this is the first evidence back in 1983 and investigated by Tamer Wassman, and yet very few people actually listened to him. And what he did was that he looked at germ-free animal. We all know what germ-free animal is. That means an animal just born and then specifically keep them the gut sterile. We feed them with sterile food, we feed them with sterile water, and we put them in a cage which is totally, even the air that they breathe is completely bacteria free. All right? So that animal is what we term as germ-free. Now, germ-free animal, is said here in that particular report, requires 30% more calories, more energy to maintain the body mass than conventional animal. Conventional animal means that the gut teeming with microorganisms. Right? So in other words, it would suggest that the bacteria in the gut is responsible for the energy. Not so. Not so. And I'll tell you why. Furthermore, in 2005, another publication state that even the germ-free animal, once when they colonize with the organism, and they produce 60% increase in body weight in fat, despite 30% drop in food intake. And again, tend to suggest that bacteria is responsible for producing fat. Not true. Not true at all. Bacteria is responsible for producing enzymes that is responsible for us to absorb fat. Now, does anybody here know that we cannot, human as such, cannot absorb fat unless the bacteria decide that we can do that? The bacteria produce two sets of enzymes. And these enzymes that is responsible for the emulsification. Emulsify fat, and once when the fat is emulsified, then the host can then absorb fat. Without this bacteria, we cannot absorb fat. Hence the importance, particularly if a child cannot absorb fat, then the patient, that child, will be forever low in cholesterol. If the child is low in cholesterol, the child will have hormonal issue, because cholesterol is one of the major metabolites or precursor for hormones. And equally, cholesterol is also a major constituent in membranes. So the child will have failure to thrive. If the child is unable to absorb cholesterol, the child will be of small status. Hence, it is not the bacteria that producing fat, but importantly, is the bacteria produce the metabolites. One of that is the enzymes that is responsible for us to emulsify fat and absorb fat. Now, for the purpose of this afternoon, I will identify, as I said, I will identify two groups of organisms, which I hope you have heard before. One is E. coli. Have you heard about Escherichia coli? Some said yes. Okay, I'm sure you have heard it on the television. And the other one group is the streptococcus. Now, this is an experiment which we did back in 1998, and we knew the answer even before we started. But the experiment we need to do before we can even try to understand the gut ecosystem of Australian population. The whole point is merely just to identify and to prove whether we Australians are very similar to other people. We have to have this proof. And this was done in Newcastle University, and we compared to the Italians and the Americans, and you find that the Americans and the Italians also have this organism called Escherichia coli, same as the Australians. Now the Australians that we actually look at, there's 11, they're all mostly university students and also university academia. And the age between all three groups are very similar, but importantly, the bulk of the organism that can grow in the presence of oxygen. Now let me just stop a minute. In the gut, we can classify microorganisms depending on whether they can actually use oxygen or they can't use oxygen. Those organisms that can grow or use oxygen is what we term as aerobes. And those that can't grow in the presence of oxygen we term as anaerobes. For every one aerobes, for every one organism that grow in the presence of oxygen, there's about 1,000 to 10,000 that can't grow in the presence of oxygen. And this is all in our gut. It's totally anaerobic in the sense that if you have oxygen in there, you virtually wipe them all out. They can't grow in the presence of oxygen. Right? But just for the sake of this afternoon, we'll just concentrate on this organism that can grow very happily in the presence of oxygen. As you can see here, we have about 70 to 95% of the organism is E. coli, Escherichia coli, and about 2 to 5% only about enterococcus. So in other words, if I culture your sample and compare to mine, no, don't compare to mine, I'm too old for that type of things, but the majority of you will be predominantly just Escherichia coli. Okay, just remember that name. Now, and I said right from the beginning, in chronic fatigue patients, we have identified that there's a significant difference in the microbiology when compared to healthy control. Now we present that data firstly in 1998 in Manly, Sydney, and the scientific basis of chronic fatigue syndrome in Sydney, Manly. And then by invitation the next year, we present the same data in the Second World Congress in Brussels. Now, can anybody here, and I know that it may be a bit after lunch, may have a glass of red wine and all that, it may be a bit difficult to even concentrate. Can I ask, when I say earlier that on the genetic issue, we are very similar to each other, so why am I keep on saying that the gut microorganism in the large bowel of fatigue patient very different to control? In what way is it so different?
Population.
Sorry?
Population. Proportion.
Population, proportion. Very good. Gee, good. Even the psychiatrist couldn't tell me. Now, the data that we present, and as I said, with this was done at Newcastle University and collaborate with Sydney University. And we were looking at the change in the gut microorganism in patients with persistent fatigue. let me just explain a few things for you first. The red one is the control subject, and the green is the fatigue patient. So let's just start with the E. coli. This is the actual percentage. On the y-axis is the percentage, and the x-axis is the number of organisms. Sorry, the names of the organism. So if we, by definition, I state to you in the previous slide that in a healthy control, E. coli range is about 90 to 95%. All right. So this is E. coli. It's about 90 to 95%. This is a healthy control. This is the chronic fatigue patient. All right. In chronic fatigue patient, 27% only is similar to that. Right. And the other. Well, 73% of patient is significantly dropped in the level of E. coli, and the concentration of E. coli. And once they drop, it is being now replaced by this group of organisms. I collectively call them streptococcus, enterococcus. Okay? So therefore, now we have a situation in patient with fatigue patient, there's a significant difference in the numbers of certain microorganisms. Although fatigue patients still got E. coli, fatigue patients still got streptococcus, enterococcus, but the numbers are significantly different. Now, just stop here for a minute, and I keep on saying, don't worry about the name of the organism, it's what they produce, okay? So if, for example, the fact that we need so many of this E. coli in the gut, we must need a lot of what they produce. All of a sudden now, patients with chronic fatigue, they don't have that what we need them. All of a sudden, their metabolizing need are substantially reduced. You will have a different human being. You will have a very, very different human being here. Now, just to prove that I'm not telling lies, this is an agar plate, what we term as a synthetic medium. We use it to grow bacteria. This is E. coli. This is E. coli. So if we just just take a sample of your fecal sample, and we plate it on this is what we see, and grow them in oxygen. This is what we see. Because it's 95% of what we can grow aerobically is this organism. All the other organism is hidden under here. We can't see them because the number is so small. It will be all here. And this is precisely what that, why is it? 95% would be E. coli, and this is what we actually see. Now, compared to a patient with Now, this is a patient coming from a patient with profound fatigue. This patient, when we saw him, we were led into this room. It was completely dark, all the curtains drawn. Patient is very photosensitive, is very emotional, can't even conduct a conversation without tears coming down, night sweat, and very, very foggy brain. Very, very poor sleep, very poor game. Now, here's where you go. See, this is the E. coli. Now, this E. coli now is completely replaced by this very tiny little spot blue organism, streptococcus. Now, this is real. This is real. We don't have to actually simulate this. This is exactly coming from a patient. So this is where I'm saying to you, the patient still got E. coli. Right? The genetic component of the bowel is still there, but the numbers are significantly different. Right? Now, this is the organism that we need. What they produce, we only need minute quantity. Now, it's produced abundance of it. That abundance of metabolites actually affect our ability to think, our ability to sleep, our ability to concentrate. Right? But today we're not talking about that. We're talking about energy. We're talking about energy this afternoon. So as I keep on saying that it is what they produced, it is important. So let's look at what exactly does E. coli produce. Now, among many other things, E. coli produces numerous things. But this is the one it is affecting, it was of concern to us this afternoon. E. coli produces chemical called charismatic acid, charismate. That's what it looks like on the other side. And charismatic acid is the precursor of all this. And the final product of all this is this. Right, so in other words, this E. coli produce folic acid. Folate produce two very important essential amino acids, tryptophan, phenylalanine, a conditional essential amino acid, tyrosine, a ubiquinone, and menaquinone. Right. Now, it is very unfortunate that we are led to believe that we get folic acid from the food that we eat. Rubbish, absolutely rubbish. Right? If you look after this organism will produce folate 24/7. Never ask for overtime. We're not even go on strike either. But if you feed it, it will produce it. Right? So this organism produces folic acid. Now, this afternoon I'll be talking to folate and prephenic. Now, everybody knows this?
Yep.
What does it do?
Gives you energy.
Huh?
Gives you energy.
Why is that? How do you know that? How do you know that CoQ10 gives you energy?
Something to do with the heart.
Sorry?
Something to do with the heart. Does it do heart energy? Increase metabolism.
Who takes CoQ10? You ever ask your health professional why you take CoQ10? You just take it because he or she tells you to do it. That's more like it. You're absolutely right. CoQ10 is important in energy metabolism. It's very, very important. CoQ10 is very, very important in energy metabolism. For scientists and for medical scientists, for health professional, how does one measure energy? How does one measure energy? How do we know that we have enough energy? Any biochemists in this audience? No biochemist?
Lactic acid.
No? Okay. We measure energy by this molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and it's regarded as the universal currency for energy. It has three components. First is this adenine, which is the DNA molecule, the carbohydrate, ribose, the sugar molecule, and three molecules of phosphate. Now, we all have this, okay? We all have it, and if you don't have it, you're not a human being. You can't move. You just cannot move. So where is this energy coming from this molecule? Every time when this ATP loses one molecule of phosphate, it produces energy. Right? ATP then converts to ADP, it gives energy. And guess how much is the energy? Absolutely enormous. Every time when it's split one phosphate, it gives 7.3 kilocalories of energy. Yeah. And where's all this stored? Anybody knows?
In the cells.
Sorry?
In the cells.
Yeah. Sorry?
Mitochondria.
Very good. I think you should be standing up here. Yeah, it's all kept in this, all this funny things called mitochondria. Every cell has it, and it depends on the activity of that cell. It will probably have more, and it has less depending, as I said, whether it is how active that is. So diagrammatically, it looks something like this. Yeah, and it's all in here, and it's generally referred to in biochemistry as the powerhouse of a cell. It is this particular organelles that store all the energy, and it is this organelle that has all the ATP, is responsible for one of the most important energy cycle. We all have to have it. So what is that energy cycle? Anybody knows? Krebs cycle. Very, hey, well done. This is the Krebs cycle, the TCA cycle, the most efficient energy cycle of all mammalian cells. Generally known as the Krebs cycle. I call it the tricarboxylic acid cycle because that's how it's been taught. The TCA cycle or the citric acid cycle, purely because this is the one that everything all fits into that. So for us to actually efficiently have this energy cycle, it involves two pathways. First one is this glycolysis, and the other one is the TCA cycle. Now, what does it do? Every time when we have one molecule of glucose and then fit into glycolysis, it produces 8 molecules of ATP. 8 molecules ATP. And then when the pyruvate then fits into in the TCA cycle to oxaloacetate and then to citric acid, it produces another 6 molecules of ATP. When it fits to alpha-ketoglutarate, another 6 molecules of ATP. To succinate acid, another 8. To fumarate, another 4, and finally back to oxaloacetate, another 6. So for every 1 molecule of glucose that we feed ourselves, it produces a total of 38 moles of energy. 38 moles of energy. And this is all stored in the mitochondria. This is all stored in the mitochondria. Now, we're all happy with that? It's vital that we understand this. Now, we get back to this. Firstly, we talk about ubiquinone. We talk about ubiquinone. Ubiquinone is responsible for converting succinate to fumarate. This is that enzyme, this cofactor, that is responsible for channeling that into that. Without this, that would just stay there. Okay, so ubiquinone is important for that conversion. What happens if all of a sudden there is no ubiquinone? If the patient is persistently low in E-coli, if the patient is persistently low in E-coli, our storage of ubiquinone will be in deficit, in negative drive. So what happens when we don't have that there? There's not enough ubiquinone to get into the TCA cycle. What happened? Absolutely. Be gone. Be gone. Right? So this side of the TCA cycle cannot be functioned adequately. So guess what? You guys would just end up with just only 28 moles instead of 38 moles of ATP. So effectively now you are not as healthy as you used to be. And people think that you guys are psychiatric. Yeah. You guys are loony.
I hope the psychiatrist listened to your presentation.
Don't challenge it. Now, if that side of the whole reaction is not there, surely that would be a bank up of succinic acid. Would that be fair to say that? You have a bank up of accumulation of succinic acid in the system. Now, I'll lead you to this publication that we did back in 1996, as early as 1996. Some of you are not even born then. Would be fair to say that? This is done in collaboration with Newcastle University, Sydney University, and John Hunt Hospital, where I was. And we're specifically looking at the metabolites produced by the the metabolites in chronic fatigue patients. What is it that we can identify? And this is what we see. This is succinic acid. This is chronic fatigue patient, and we compare to non-CFS patient, and significantly increase, 1.3 compared to 0.9, and statistically that is a significant accumulation. So therefore now we have evidence to support what we are saying, that when ubiquinone is not there, when CoQ10 is not there, there will be a bank up of succinic acid, and here we have proved saying that. More importantly, some 10-15 years later, Professor Mears from Belgium actually confirmed what we are saying, that fatigue patient, this was done in 2009, and what he did was that he compared 58 patients with MECFS and compared to 22 control, and specifically look at the level of CoQ10, and this is the result. CoQ10 was significantly lower in MECFS patient than in normal controls. And importantly, there was a significant inverse relationship. Do you know what inverse relationship means? With fatigue. So the lower the CoQ10, the more fatigued the patient would be. So now we have another evidence tend towards what we are saying back in 1998 is correct. Now, I don't want to sort of constantly hammer on this, but when we first presented the paper back in 1998, there were 4 very important people that hold, they still do, hold all the NHMRC grant, stood up and said that we are a bunch of cowboys, and we shoot at the hips, and we don't follow the gold standard. And I think what that gentleman is trying to very politely telling me in front of over several hundred international delegates is that Henry, you have no right to be looking into chronic fatigue, all right? Because fatigue is a psychiatric disease. And I have no right to do that. Right? Interestingly, that gentleman is still as the director of a major department in Sydney University. He actually openly stated there's something different about the gut microorganism. So he is admitting that. But after close to 20 odd years, he finally decided that he has to change. Right? But anyway, this is what Professor Meir actually supported and actually found that what we're seeing back in 1998 has truth in it. How am I going? Am I too slow? No? Now, I want to switch our attention now to folic acid. Folate. How many people here actually take folate?
Take it.
And would it be fair that you take it because you've been told to take them? Are you all fatigue sufferers? You have chronic fatigue?
Depends on your methylation issues too.
Okay. All right. This is the nucleus of folate. This is the nucleus of folate, and this is exactly the nucleus for DNA. So this is what we term as the purine and pyrimidine ring, and of the 5 carbons that is responsible for ATP and DNA, 2 of the 5 carbon comes from folate. So E. coli is low. Fatigue patients, E. coli is low. Low in CoQ10, also low in folate. If the patient is low in folate, this molecule will never be constructed. Now you have another effect that why the patient is fatigued. You can't produce this molecule to produce ATP. You can't have this molecule. If you haven't got this molecule, your DNA will be also low. Your ability to cell repair will be low. That's what you have fatigue. Now, am I telling lies, or am I just taking you advantage? Now, this is a very simple experiment, and it was done back in 1989 and done by a group of Japanese, and again, very few people actually pay attention to it. What they look at is that whether in fact the gut microorganism is responsible for producing folate. And they look at 10 animal, and this is rats in this case. In control subject, this is the amount of folate that they produce. Once when you decontaminate, and this is a procedure that is done quite regularly in ICU patient, and they give the patients very potent antibiotics. It's trying to, by doing that you decrease the incidence of infection in ICU. These are the 2 antibiotics, and in Australia we have 3 antibiotics. Polymyxin B is one of the very potent one. We don't use tinidazole, we use metronidazole. This is an antibiotic that target the anaerobes. It's an organism that can't grow in oxygen, and gentamicin. So these are the usual procedure that we decontaminate patient with the idea decreasing the patient incidence of infection in an intensive care unit. But in this particular case, they want to make sure that if we kill most of those gut organisms in the large bowel, what happened? This is what happened. You have a significant drop of folate. Once when we decrease the number of microorganisms in the bowel, folate will go accordingly. Now what happened, we actually have we will bind the 2 ends of the large bowel. So they have a situation what we term as overgrowth. We let the microorganism in the large bowel to keep on growing. And see that? So it's telling us that microorganism in the large bowel is responsible for producing folate. It doesn't have to be coming from the foliage that we eat. Right? And again, I emphasize, if you look after this organism, it will produce abundance of folate for you. The second thing that is important in this study, although they didn't quite identify that, is that the large bowel is responsible for doing a lot of absorption. Yes? Yeah? You got to speak up, I'm a bit deaf.
Oh, sorry. You're saying if you look after the folate, then it will kind of look after...
You look after the E. coli, look after the bacteria.
How do you look after the folate?
Oh, feed them.
With?
Now, how do you look after the bacteria, you mean?
How do you look after the bacteria?
Feed them.
So if you take folate, that will help or not?
No, why would it help?
So how do you feed the bacteria?
Come on.
Greens.
Leafy greens. Who said that? See, we Asians have slightly bit different eating habits, you Caucasians. We have vegetables accompanied with meat. and you Caucasian have meat accompanied vegetables. So we Asians love to be Caucasians, and hence that's why you got KFC and McDonald's in Beijing. And overnight we have fat Chinamen. That's how the works go around, okay? Yeah, how do you feed them? Very simple. Just eat properly. I mean, yeah, for centuries, I mean, we humans been practicing eating habits long before you even talk about this. And only, well, when was the last, when do you think your grandparents ever had folic acid popping pills? No. Anyway, if you're interested, come to see me later. But,
We all want to know the answer to that, actually.
I'm sorry?
We're not eating properly and that's why we're sick.
No, I didn't say that.
Well,
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. No, wait a minute. This is not that simple, you know. I'm merely just trying to make it, trying to talk, the topic of my today's talk is about energy.
yep.
All right? Well, let's just stick with that for the time being, okay?
Can I ask a question about folate? Is folate in the blood same as folate in the stools?
Yes?
Okay. If you've got high concentration of folate in your blood, then you'll have high concentration of folate in your blood.
Doesn't, no.
Okay.
Not at all. And it all depends on whether the microorganisms in the bowel also need folate.
Okay.
All right? Now this is a publication that's been done as early as 1963, and clearly this is a very, very old publication. I'm always delighted doing that because I like to challenge people, and I've always been criticized. I like to take mention about old publications and not the most recent one. And my reply to that is that if it is true, what age got to do with it? All right? And same thing is that if the world is round, been identified the world is round back in the 16th century, do we always have to prove that it's still round every time we hop on the aeroplane, or not? Just because it's old. But this publication, in the first instance, they used the wrong word. It's not folic acid, it should be folate. The intestinal synthesis of folate in monoflora chicken. That means that this, look at the newborn chicken, chook, and we feed them nothing else except E-coli. And let's see what happens. So these are the germ-free animal, as I defined earlier, that these are the organisms that not exposed to air, not exposed to any other food, and all the food that they eat it would be completely sterile. The air that they breathe will also be sterile. This is a word term as gonotrophic. That is, we put E. coli in the drinking water and let them just have that, nothing else. And I want you to identify, look at the liver, muscle, and the brain. In germ-free animal, the folate in liver is 0.75. Once when we feed the animal with E. coli, it came up to 1.3. Right? Virtually twice as many. Twice as much. The muscle is 0.04, is 0.1, tenfold. Particularly in the brain, 0.05, 0.25. So here you have a situation where the animal is not eating anything else, merely just E. coli. And E. coli is responsible for that increase in folate. Any question? Yes?
Did this study then show an increase in the chicks being more energetic?
No, that's not the issue here.
So that's not that you look at that?
No, the whole idea here is to look if we just give the animal with a specific organism that produces folate, would they have folate increase in various organs? Another question is that if patient is specifically and persistently low in E. coli, what is the level of folate in the blood? And this is done by Jacobson. Jacobson is a hematologist, and he looked at 60 patients, 30 male, 30 female, and what he found was that 50% of patients with chronic fatigue is low in serum folate, and then and about 13% on the borderline. So if you add two together, close to about 63% of patients with fatigue will be low or deficient in folate in relation to a decrease in the level or the concentration of E. coli. Okay? We all have any more questions? Because I'm leaving this organism now. I'm going to something which is much more complicated. Yes?
I got a bit stuck back there on the brain. There's a lot more folate in the brain than the other organs, comparatively. Germ-free.
Germ-free is 0.05?
Yeah, it's like
0.25.
Yeah, it's a lot more. So,
that's another difference, right? But the point of this exercise merely just to identify if you give E. coli with various organs increase in the concentration of folic acid. Now, whether in fact that why the brain has more than the muscles, that is basically an anatomical or histological issue here. Right? But the whole idea is just to identify whether giving the patient E. coli would increase folate, because E. coli produce folate.
I'm wondering if it has some impact on brain fog.
No, not yet. Not yet. All right. That's another day. Okay, that's another day. Now, as I said, I'm going to leave this organism and look into something which is a bit more involved, but I will make it as simple as possible so that we have some understanding why energy level in fatigue patient is quite deficient. Now remember what I said earlier, that when E. coli is low, this has been replaced by these two organisms, streptococcus, enterococcus. Now I want to refer you to a paper that one of my students did, and this was done again in collaboration with Melbourne University, Brussels University, and particularly with Dr. Don Lewis in Bonville, because he's the one that actually supply all the patient. And the whole idea is look at the level of lactic acid and what are these organisms, do they produce lactic acid? Now what John did was that he fed this organism, enterococcus, with glucose. And the lady at the back actually say, what is the food that we eat, or what are the food that we should not eat? Now 3 years ago I was invited to go to London and talk about the E of sugar. This is the evil of sugar, and I'm telling you now, why is it that you guys need to be concerned about not having too much sugar? Because it really is a very dangerous situation. When you feed glucose in this organism, enterococcus, and what he did was that he labeled the glucose with C13, and he followed where this C13 carbon goes. For every one molecule of glucose you feed to this organism, it produces nothing else except lactic acid. Glucose has 6 molecules, lactic acid has 3, so every one molecule of glucose it produces 2 molecules of lactic acid. Nothing else. He did exactly the same thing to this organism, streptococcus, and very similar to enterococcus. You feed glucose to the streptococcus, it produces predominantly lactic acid. We also measure the pH. Now we all understand what the word pH stands for. The acidity of it. Now he grew streptococcus in a very nutritious broth, what we term as brain-heart infusion. Most microorganisms will grow in this broth. Nothing much happened in the first 2 hours. As soon as you add glucose, the pH just plummet to about 4.5. That 4.5 is very similar to the gut of Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, 4.5. But importantly is that it stays there. Right? This is just 1.45% of glucose. And we human takes abundance of glucose. You Caucasian love desserts. You love it. You guys love cakes. Yeah, you guys can go out there, you can forget about entrees and everything else as long as you have the dessert. Is that correct? Don't tell lies. You love dessert. But I'm telling you, if you are a persistent sufferer of fatigue, first thing you need to observe, cut down your intake. In fact, actually, do away with sugar completely. This is the thing that will cause you foggy brain, poor concentration, mind going blank, sleep disturbance. You can sleep for 12 hours, get up in the morning as if you haven't slept at all.
So when you're talking about glucose, are you talking about glucose as the individual product? Like, I guess what I'm saying is fruit considered bad because it's high in...
Fruit. With this organism, fruit contains a lot of fructose. Yeah. This organism has this ability converting fructose back to glucose. So if you are really serious about this, no fruit. No fruit. We Asian, only time we Asian have a piece of fruit is New Year's Day, and we have only just one orange, and we regard this orange as something as gold. Right? New Year's Day we have an orange, but you guys force your kids to have 3 oranges, squeeze them, make sure, Junior, you have that before you leave, okay? Entirely different practice. Why is it that we need so much oranges? Anyway, I got ourselves into a lot of trouble because, anyway, I won't go there. Now, he repeated exactly the same experiment now with enterococcus. Yes?
I've been hesitating to try D-ribose. Is it the same as glucose?
No, it's not.
It's not.
Glucose is very different. Glucose is 6 carbon, ribose is 5.
So as a supplement, does it then make sense to you that people with fatigue might take the D-ribose as it feeds into that energy production?
No.
No?
You don't need to take that. There's a lot of food that contains a lot of ribose.
Okay.
It's no need for that, really. Now, as I said, that with enterococcus, again, nothing much happened. As soon as you add glucose, and it goes around to go back, the pH even got worse than the previous one, and it maintains it. Right? And again, emphasize that pH is very similar to ulcerative colitis. Now, every piece of meat, every vegetables that we eat, all of this contains a lot of nitrate. And as soon as it reaches large bowel, the nitrate is then converted to nitrite. Now, in the neutral pH, about 6 to 7, that's the end product. It's just excreted out. Nothing much will happen with that. However, in an acid colon, when it's low pH, nitrite now, instead of being excreted out, is then converted to nitrous or nitric oxide. Now this is a This is a publication, and it's done in 2003, and the whole idea is see whether in fact that fatigue patient is an increase in nitric oxide in chronic fatigue patients. Right? And if you look at, there's about 93 publications that so far identify that chronic fatigue has an increased level of nitric oxide. And this is what we, again, it confirms what we're saying. That's a reduced level of ubiquinone, but importantly, it has increased nitric oxide in MECFS. So what exactly is the function of nitric oxide? Now, one of the bad things about nitric oxide is that it actually squeezes iron from iron-sulfur complexes. It squeezes iron from iron-sulfur. And autistic kids, for example, or if you actually look into a care for autistic kids, the symptoms are very similar to chronic fatigue. In fact, if you talk to the clinicians who look after both groups, they will tell you that clinically they're very, very similar. And we all know that autistic kids had low in iron because they squeeze iron from transferrin. Right? So one of the bad habits of nitric oxide, as I said, it actually squeezes iron from iron complex. And one of the important for this afternoon is I want to highlight this aconitase. Is there any evidence in that? Now this is a paper that Thomas actually, this is done in, just this year. Oh, great, I didn't even know that. And what they're trying to find out whether in fact that that nitric oxide has anything to do with the TCA cycle, and this is what they found. When there's an increase in nitric oxide, there's a mitochondrial dysfunction, as well as there's an inhibition of aconitase. Right? So as I was saying earlier, nitric oxide, because of the acidity, will then squeeze iron from iron-sulfur complexes, and aconitase is one of those complexes. Now let's get back to the TCA cycle. This is aconitase. Aconitase is responsible for converting aconitic acid to alpha-ketoglutarate. So what happens if we have an increased nitric oxide, and would it be fair to say that aconitase would not be there, and then there will be an accumulation of aconitic acid similar to succinic acid? Would that be fair to say that? Okay, and I'll draw back to the previous publication that we did in 1996. First is that we talk about succinic acid, which significantly increase. Now, the second one now is aconitic acid, and you compare to a fatigue patient to non-fatigue, this is significantly increased. Right? P is less than 0.05. So now, we have two mechanisms that is affecting one of the most efficient energy cycle in human. Firstly is the downregulation of ubiquinone. Now we have another mechanism that eliminates aconitase. Now we all know that, as I said, that every time when this spin once, it produces 38 moles of ATP. What happens if we haven't got E-coli and lack of ubiquinone? And we already stated that this is what happened. Instead of 38, we have now 28 moles of ATP. Now we can now add what happens when we have E. coli, lack of ubiquinone, and also lack of aconitase. We are effectively only have, that's what's happening. Instead of 38, now we have just 14. So this is basically why fatigue patients are fatigued. All right? This is why you guys are fatigued. Why we all are fatigued. It doesn't have to be chronic fatigue. You know? We all have this type of mechanism, except that sometimes, well, with chronic fatigue, you're persistently low in this organism. Why is it like that? Well, there'll be another issue, another day perhaps. All right, I'll stop here.
So from your point of view, is this reversible?
Yes, absolutely. We happen again and again.
Okay, so how is it reversible?
How is it reversible? Get the E-coli back up. The difficulty with chronic fatigue is that it is multifactorial. You've got chronic fatigue has oxide intolerance, you've got foggy brain, you've got poor concentration, you've got neurocognitive impairment. You also have a multi-cycle of bowel motility. Sometimes it could be constipated, other times it would be loose bowel motion, or in the same day you could be constipated and then at night you could have loose bowel motion. So there are all these factors that get together, right? But just today we just talk about fatigue. Right? How can we work to redeem it? Look after that organism. Look after that organism. Go and talk to a practitioner that knows about this. One of the prime GP that is in this beautiful city is Don Lewis in Donville. Talk to him. And yes?
Is anybody studying how long it would take to get a chronic fatigue patient E. coli results up to a healthy state E. coli results?
No, I can't answer that question. No, I haven't done that. But see, don't forget, we Australians are 3 years ahead of the rest of the world in this. Even the Americans want this type of technology over there, but I just don't want to go to America. But the point really asked is that only very recently, now that the so-called chronic fatigue is accepted as what it is, okay? Now, where do we get all the money doing all this? Nobody gave us a single cent. Everything that we did is self-funded. And this is started in 1992. Every experiment we did, we pay for it. Right? The government didn't pay a single thing. That's why we're so slow. That's why we only just got now, Henry Budd's gotten enough courage to say, listen guys, you guys have been 20 years behind thinking about chronic fatigue. It is organic, it's not psychiatric. Yeah?
Are you aware of how much the microbiome is being studied in other illnesses? And how some of those results might be?
I did say that I would come to talk about this. Is very important because in the media every day there's somebody talking about the microbiome.
It's a lot of wellness stuff.
Oh, there's wellness stuff. Yeah, right. Okay. No, I know exactly where you're coming from. Yeah, and in fact, that very recently in Brisbane there is a new institute that's came out called Microba. Right? They're looking at the microbiome of the gut. Now, the difference between microbiome and the microbiota is that, as I said, the microbiome is talking about the genetic component. The genetic component, the DNA of the gut. Okay? The microbiota is the study of organisms, how they grow, what the eating habits, how can we suppress them, what is it that they grow that we need, what is that they grow that we don't need, that type of things. That we've been doing it for the last 60, 70 years about this. But very few, because this is not as sexy as microbiome, very few people talk about microbiota. Now microbiome, again you need to understand, they're talking about DNA. They don't, because DNA can come from dead organism, live organism, or injured organism. So they lump them all together and they give you some sort of a percentage. Right? So the question you need to ask is that, do I really care about those dead, or am I really concerned about the live one? That you have to make that decision. Secondly, is that they don't actually give you a count. Because they measure in DNA. So I think you need to be very, it's very sexy. In fact, me, for example, we have to be aware of this type of technology. If we don't, we can't move forward. But the fact that we're actually looking at the DNA, it produces huge amount of data, but nobody can understand it. Nobody can understand what they grow, what is it that affect the host. Are they actually need what, things that they produce that we need, that type of things. Yeah.
I've got two questions. One is, if your child was born by C-section, is there anything you can do later?
Yes, absolutely.
What can you do?
Now, see, one of the most important thing about Australia plays a very, very important, in fact, that the people in Xyro is one of the leading experts in the area of looking at breast milk. One of the most important about breast milk is that prebiotic is a substance that enable certain microorganism to grow. And now in fact, that Australia actually capitalize on this. The formula milk now has that specific prebiotic. That's why the Chinese all come down from China, get a whole bulk of it back in China because of that particular product, the prebiotic. Once when the prebiotic line the gut, line the newborn gut, it is impossible for any other microorganism, particularly food poisoning organism, to attack on and cause disease to the child. Hence, the importance of breast milk.
But did the child get enough endogenous bacteria, or have they got a limited range?
They have when we're born, because we come down from the birth canal, initially we have virtually the same type of microorganism as the mother.
But the child born by C-section?
If you're a child born by C-section, you have an issue.
So do they need an inoculation later? Or?
Well, no. Again, I say that if you're born by a cesarean, the breast milk would be very helpful. The breast milk, because it actually encourage that what we term the breast milk is bifidogenic. It actually allows certain microorganisms, particularly the bifidobacterium, to multiply, and the lactobacillus to multiply. Other than like all this E-coli and stuff.
So you wouldn't try to introduce more endogenous bacteria, just feed what?
Not yet.
And what food specifically encourage E. coli?
Somebody asked me the same question. Sorry, you.
Yeah.
No, wait. Well, the lady here asked, what food is it we can use to specifically improve E. coli? And there are a couple of ways of doing that. You can actually give the patient live E. coli. That's the E. coli probiotics. Or you can actually increase the consumption of galactose. Galactose. All right. Fructose oligosaccharide. No, don't tempt me in this, because last time when I joined the discussion, I was harassed because I'm not a dietitian, so therefore I have no right to talk about this type of things. So I have no right to talk about diet. However, I'm talking about bacteria. You asked me a question about how you can grow bacteria. I'm telling you how you can grow them. Now, how in fact actually going to affect the host, I can't. It's not my responsibility. The gentleman in the back first.
I took E. coli under Dr. Peace, John Peace, for some months doing several of your bioscreen tests, which showed that the E. coli was very low.
Yes.
But after taking it for some months, the E. coli reading didn't come up.
Okay.
It didn't change. Are there other factors that can prevent you absorbing that?
No. It's got nothing to do with absorption. Nothing with that. Now, anybody who takes probiotics need to understand, for any organism we try to introduce to us, you must understand the concept of the compatibility between the adhesive properties, between the adhesin produced by the probiotic, by the bacteria, and the receptors on the gut. If there's no compatibility, that is, the adhesin doesn't tack onto the gut lining, every bowel motion you'll flush out. Okay? Now, the thing is that if you've been taking probiotics for a few months and it's on testing, it's not there. oh, Henry, your lab is absolutely useless. You can't even test this. Not true. Now, the important thing is that probiotics, before you reach to you, they've done a lot of QC, a lot of quality control, and when you actually receive it, they are what they are. So there's no question in that. But importantly is that how you actually store them. You need to check the expiry date. Right? And importantly, after a couple of months and the symptoms still there and there's no improvement, then you need to go back to your health professional. Your health professional then needs to heal your gut lining. Right? There's nothing wrong with the probiotics, right? There's nothing wrong with the laboratory, and it's just that your gut lining hasn't got that receptors. Clear? Yeah.
My doctor, Don, recommended...
Don Lewis, yes.
Bone broth.
Bone broth, yes.
The other week.
Yes.
Can you talk about why he's recommending that? And second thing is, I can't tolerate bone
You
broth.
can't bone it.
I get headaches.
Right. How many here, I'm not trying to be... How many here are vegetarian?
Vegan.
Vegan? Right, okay. It's difficult.
I'm actually looking at a vegan, organic vegan broth just
Right,
there. So
okay.
you can get plant-based broth.
Okay, right.
Which you
Now, to answer your question, why do we recommend meat broth or bone broth, is that there's a specific chemical in there called protoporphyrin, factor 9. It's in blood. And microorganisms, particularly those organisms that can't grow in the presence of oxygen, thrive on this. Hence the meat component. And bone is their that soft bit. What do you call it? I got mental marrow. Yeah, that have abundance of that. That's why we suggest meat broth. And in the laboratory, it's a standard practice. If we are to grow organisms that can't survive oxygen, we put them into what we term as cooked meat medium. Right? That's where we suggest we use a cooked meat broth, bone broth. Now, if you can't do that, the next best thing is to use fish broth. Can you tolerate fish?
Fish, I haven't tried a broth.
Yeah, and for vegan, then soybean protein. Now, it's not as effective. It's not as effective as meat broth or bone broth.
Tempeh in that, or the fermented ones?
No, I'm sorry.
Like tempeh?
Tempeh, fermented.
Oh, look, I'm just a humble bacteriologist. What I know about this type of things. Wait a minute, this lady first.
Hi, I've got two questions. Firstly, thank you so much for coming to talk to us today, because I really want to manage my health using, science-based evidential medicine, and it can be really hard to find that on the internet. So thank you very much for sharing your expertise. Two quick questions. One, can having to take a lot of antibiotics actually just kill the bacteria in your gut? And is that possibly a cause for this whole imbalance thing to happen?
Again, depends on how do you define plenty or often. It is important you all need to understand. One of the things about we human, and the fact is that we are where we are now, must be over thousands of years of evolution. The gut microorganisms in us are very, very stable. They are very, very resilient. So does that mean they're always the same? No, it's just like hopping a tram in Melbourne. If you don't hang on to something, it will toss you around. It'll be like this, up and down like that. But the point is that if it goes derail or go down, then symptoms. That will have symptoms. So the answer to the question is that if a patient only takes antibiotic once or twice a year,
About excessive,
there's no reason for that person to be too concerned. Secondly, as I've mentioned before, for every one aerobes, there's about 1,000 to 10,000 anaerobes. And if that antibiotic doesn't affect those anaerobes, there's no reason for you to be too concerned with it. Now, I understand the hesitant of using antibiotics. Some people like to be stoic. They just like to just take on to it and keep antibiotic. But if antibiotic actually can relieve that, and you take it once or twice a year, it doesn't matter. So to answer your question, you need to understand what antibiotics you would take, whether in fact that actually affect the anaerobes. If it is, then I think you will have issue.
I'll look at that. My second quick question was around taking supplements, and obviously we've got gaps here in our ATP cycle, and is taking CoQ10 orally actually going to plug that gap, or does it not work that way?
No, it definitely does, but the point still remains is that when you eat CoQ10, does it actually bypass the stomach? Because the stomach is very acidic. The fasting pH of the stomach, do you know how low is that? It's 1. 1. 1. It's very, very acidic. So the question you need to ask, what supplement you take, would it survive at the stomach and get in the small intestine for it to absorb?
So if you get something that's, say, enteric coated that can get through.
Yeah. The second question then is that, right, most of the things that we absorb, how much actually get down to the large bowel? Right? So you need to think about all that. But the point is, if this organism produces it, why go about supplement? Let's get them to do it. Let them make it. Let them make it. They've been doing it for centuries. Yes, sorry.
Just a quick question. So what sort of test would allow you to get a count of the E. coli? Because if you go to a regular doctor, I know you mentioned Dr. Don Lewis, but you go to a regular doctor, you do analysis, and you don't get.
No, you don't get it. No, they don't do this.
What's the name?
No, I'm not here to advertise it. Yeah.
My question is about fecal transplants.
Yes.
Would they help?
Now, the issue of fecal transplant. Now, frequently asked question, do I believe in fecal transplant? Why not? Fecal transplant is just a much more expensive, glorified probiotics. Right? They're just probiotics. So, if it works, it works. It's very expensive.
But should we actually already have those things endogenous and just need to feed the right one?
They are all endogenous.
They're all there already?
Yes,
just need
yes.
to transfer.
Yeah, I mean, look, you pay for it because they do a lot of tests in it. They test for HIV, they test for Hep B, and all sorts of things that they have to make sure that the organism that comes from that particular person is safe for the person to take. So that's why it's so expensive. Plus the fee of a gastroenterologist. Yeah.
I think I'm right in remembering that you said if E. coli were low, streptococcus levels are high. And a lot of it has been focused on getting the E. coli levels up. Is there any benefit in trying to, at the same time, get the streptococcus down, or do we just
glucose
to the glucose?
Stop taking glucose. Go to Coles, Woolies, find me one item hasn't got glucose in it. Does that answer your question? Sorry, there's somebody at the back there. I'm not trying to ignore you, but yeah.
In one of your graphs, you showed that a person with Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis would have that very low pH.
They do.
Can you assist with increasing E. coli with a condition like that? Will that help to heal?
Highly unlikely.
It won't help.
No, highly unlikely.
What would help with a person with that condition?
Sodium bicarbonate. Alkalis. Now, if you are to alkalize, be very careful. You don't do it while you're having meals because you will upset the gastric secretion. Only do it in between meals.
Do you believe that condition could be reversed or improved?
Well, I definitely hope so.
Yeah.
Look, It's already been done, okay? And if you look at what's already been published, there are very good experiments that they, instead of giving patient mesalazine, which is a standard treatment for UC, they give patient live E. coli. And the efficacy is just as good, giving the patient probiotics rather than mesalazine. Now don't be so formal, please.
Sorry, Henry.
Thank you.
What happens if you've had your large bowel removed?
Sorry?
What happens if you've had your large bowel removed?
Well,
Could that question
it's
be
difficult.
explained, please, because we hadn't been able to hear.
It's difficult. I'm sorry? Did you say it?
I just wanted to hear the question and your answers.
Oh, the lady asked, what happens if you have your large bowel removed, a colectomy? It's difficult. And then again, depends on what's the excision, what percentage of the colon's been removed. And again, if you're on the large section, then we may have a chance. But if it's virtually the bulk of it, it's very difficult. I haven't reached that stage and give you a proper answer. Yeah.
So my daughter, I'm giving the E-coli to at the moment after bioscreen in consultation with someone you know quite well. I was recommended to do it, put it into 100 mils and gradually increase her. If someone, like she just goes quite crazy, even if I increase it by like 0.2 of a mil, is that just die-off occurring?
How long it's been?
I've had her, I can't get her above 7, she's 6, above 7.5 mil, and I started 6 months ago. It takes, and then I put her on Toxaprevent afterwards to try and just mop up whatever toxins are going on. But it just seems very difficult to actually progress her along the product that she needs to be on to. I've seen huge improvements, even just on 7.5 mil, but she's supposed to be at 100.
Can we talk about privately?
Yeah, sure.
My question is just, I've heard some people say that maybe it's an illness process that causes the dysbiosis rather than the dysbiosis maybe causing the illness, and I'm just wondering what your perspective is on that.
There are many ways that can cause a change in or alteration of the gut ecology. No doubt that stress is an important thing, and what has been found was that the Italian follow a group of university students, and they did gut microbiology before and during and after an exam. And what they found was that during the exam, the gut microorganism is significantly different than compared to the ones before that exam, or everything comes back. So stress factor is very, very important. Now, one of the things people that actually identify and tell us all about this was NASA. NASA subject their astronauts into this spinning machine, and they look at the microbiology before that and during that, and then lo and behold, when the astronaut being spin around, the gut ecology is significantly different. Right? But this was back in the 60s. Nobody believed it, because why would anybody be so stupid enough to spin themselves around to have to change that? Right? But the point, what they're trying to tell us is that stress factor is very important in looking at it. Now, for the past 3 years, our company has been, we're fortunate enough to actually give stipends to 3 PhD students looking into the gut and the brain connection, and how important the gut and the brain. Interestingly, is that the criteria of IBS. You know what IBS stands for? Irritable bowel, right? That functional bowel disease, that term functional bowel disease now has been superseded by disorder of the gut-brain interaction. Right? So we are on the right track. Australia is on the right track in understanding functional bowel disease. Right? So the stress is very important. And if you are fair dinkum about this, is that you need to identify what stress level you are. And if you are working during the day, go into a room, lock yourself in that room for half an hour, meditate. Just de-stress. Teach your patient to how you can actually do de-stress. So food definitely is an issue. Definitely, sugar is definitely an issue. Stress is another issue. Infection is another one.
I guess my question is about prebiotics. So like inulin, there's a lot of talk about inulin and how inulin is good. From your point of view, from a bacterial point of view, inulin's supposed to feed the probiotics. Is inulin something that is good to take, or is it something...
You're getting me in a lot of trouble saying things like this. I'm not a dietitian, but this is again a very frequent question, is that what about prebiotics? Now, as I said to you earlier, that Australia has a reputation. The CSIRO boys have a very, very good reputation in actually elucidating the importance of prebiotics. However, this guy, this little Chinaman, doesn't believe in prebiotics. Because the whole idea is that prebiotic is that it enrich, just like antibiotics. It's very broad. That prebiotics that like this lady suggests, inulin. Inulin is not even just, it helps to grow numerous microorganisms. So in fact, you are indirectly creating dysbiosis. Right? I don't believe in prebiotics. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't take them. Okay, but this is, you asked me and I'm expressing my opinion.
So on that then, because inulin is a high resistant starch, does it then at some point break down to glucose because you're saying sugar is bad?
You should ask the dietitian. I get in a lot of trouble. I get in a lot of trouble doing that.
So you've demonstrated this E. coli and strep related acidosis and problems with ubiquinone, folate. I assume there are a whole lot of other aspects of the Krebs cycle that are affected by other aspects of
Absolutely.
So this is one piece of a much bigger puzzle, or is this critically important? It is critically important, but are there three other things that are equally important, or is this the...
No. I specifically used the way I did it because I want to impress on you and that fatigue in chronic fatigue is not psychiatric. Okay. However, now, just because the patient lacked ubiquinone, and I said that this is all wiped out, the patient lack of aconitase, this is all wiped out. However, in true situation, other things can also fit into this. Once when fit in, that still goes into that, or fits into this, and that can still go in. So basically, that's what I'm saying. Human is very resilient. Just because you lack ubiquinone, that doesn't mean this entire cycle will cease. But as I said, this is the most efficient one. But you will not be as poor if you haven't got other mechanisms that actually go into that.
What I'm also asking is, are there other aspects of our biology that are equally as responsible for chronic fatigue syndrome as this dysbiosis? Are there other things that are causing chronic fatigue syndrome as clearly as this is?
No, this is by far the most serious as far as energy is concerned. All right? But again, I need to emphasize that fatigue patients, you have multi-system involvement, multi-organ involvement, not just energy. Right? This is only just one aspect of chronic fatigue. Your turn.
I've got a question in regards to chronic fatigue, but it's from biotoxin illness, so mould. So you've got the biotoxin illness. Have you got to address the mould issues first? Because you often get parasites and all that. So I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia and POTS, but this year I actually found out it was chronic inflammatory response syndrome or biotoxin illness.
No comment.
Interesting.
No comment. I don't want to get into that. Same as I don't want to get myself into Lyme disease.
I was going to add throw that in, but yeah.
I'd like to echo somebody else's comment about thanking you for your coming here and talking. In particular, I'd like to thank you for your efforts over 25, 30 years in trying to get the established status quo to understand this. My specific... Thank you. My specific question is the metabolites that you identified in some of these others, how do they relate to the ones that the recent American research has brought forward and that they're claiming they've just discovered?
Can you name me one?
Look, I'm not a scientist, I don't remember the names of the metabolites, but Dr. Davis in California and another doctor in New York have recently brought out issues, things that they've discovered through analysis of the metabolites. I'm just wondering...
There'd be thousands upon thousands of metabolites. Yeah. So it's...
The specific ones they've identified as being way out of balance in CFS versus the rest of the population.
Well, I have to say that I'm not aware of that. Does anybody know what?
Yeah, it's the metabolomic study that Chris Armstrong did, as well as Rob Nabio.
Nabio is the name, I can't remember, thank you. Yep.
Yeah.
Arabinose.
I think they looked at the
Chris Armstrong.
in blood, and I think blood was the main one, like plasminogen, I don't know. But
Chris is one of my students.
Yeah, it's not specific to the gut.
Yeah.
Just a quick one. When you do your testing, when people send the samples in, do you test for things like fasciola hepatica, fasciolopsis fusci, those sorts of worms and things?
No, we don't actually look for those specific. I'm not aware that they actually involved in in chronic fatigue, are we? Well, my reading, and that's is basically is in Giardia, is definitely particularly the outbreak in New Zealand and also in what's the other one in America state.
Can you speak up? I just heard the word Giardia, and I was wondering what you were saying about that.
Well, like everything else, is that when there is a change in the gut microorganism, and if that change is related to infection, e.g. Giardia, blastocystis, or Dientamoeba, or all that, then you must resolve that first before you even try to rebalance the gut. So
Giardia ages and ages ago, would you still have that in your system?
Well, that depends on whether you'll be consistently reinfected.
Well, I left Sydney, so probably not.
All right. So I think we've been telling them that we should go.
Yeah, because my battery's running out as well. Can you ask me kindly up here, please? Can you do that?
Yep, of course.
Great. Well, thank you so much for today. That was absolutely brilliant. Very much appreciate your time here.